Well, I will go anywhere and do anything, literally. And if it works, I will do it. And I'll keep doing it. And then if it works, I'll tell my friends and tell my clients. And they value that information more. Whoever controls that data controls the power of the world. And they have it, and we're surrendering it to them for free. I think the opportunities are outside the United States over the next 10 years. When you unleash 1.3 billion people who've been suppressed economically for 1,000 years, whatever it is, it's just, and you have this incredible tsunami of excitement.
I've been looking forward to this interview for a very long time. I know many of you have asked for this as well. Today, I've flown over to the Bahamas to interview Kiril Sokoloff. Kiril is kind of revered amongst investment research writers as the premier service in the world today. He's been doing this for a long time, and his clients are the most famous people in the world, the most famous industries, governments, hedge fund guys, everybody, you name it, listens to what Kiril has to say. Kiril's real skill set is peering into the future. He's less about the trade today, but more about where is the world going and how can we take advantage of the big trends that are happening. And I personally love a good big trend theory as well and a good discussion around it. So I want to dig in with him about technology. I want to talk about China. I want to talk about India. I want to talk about the future of the US, demographics, health, all a number of long-term issues, and see where we get to, see what Kiril's framework is, and see how we can take advantage of that. So settle in. I think this is going to be a fantastic discussion. Kiril, great to finally sit down and chat with you. You're one of the most requested interviews we've ever had. We've got a lot of friends in common. I just think it's going to be a fabulous opportunity to talk through some of the great things that are going on and just pick your brains. I think I'd love to start from the beginning. And I think one of the key things to talk about is the deafness and how you've dealt with that in your life, which I think is something that defines you as a person. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to have this conversation. Helen Keller was both deaf and blind. And she said, when you're deaf, you're cut off from people. When you're blind, you're cut off from things. So if you ask the average person whether it's better to be blind or deaf, they say, oh yeah, much better to be deaf. But since they're neither, they don't know. So in my case, in the mid-teens, I started to lose my hearing, and it just went down and down and down until I went totally deaf. So there were a lot of lessons from that. The first is that everything is impermanent. That's a deep Buddhist philosophy. My hearing, I couldn't hold on to it. It just went, right? And then the interconnectedness of all things. So before there was the internet and cell phones, I would literally have to stop people in the streets of New York and say, can you help me make a phone call to call home? I'd be at an airport, I'd have to stop someone and say, I can't hear, because in those days they didn't have the posting of where the planes were, but there'd be some announcement I couldn't hear. Can you help me? So that's a very hard thing for an independent person to have to do, but I realized I'm interconnected with everybody. Then there was the lesson of never giving up. And what deaf people do, late deaf and adults, is they give up. It's just too much strain. Because you're reading lips, and lip reading is very imperfect, and your mind is like a computer, so you go, and you just get so tired trying to figure it out. At the end of whatever your day is, I'm done. And I resolved I would never not go to a meeting. I would never not go to a social event, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful. And I would go to meetings, and some guy in the back of the room with his hand like this would ask a 5-minute question. You obviously can't say, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear you. So you just, what are you going to do? Walk out? So you got to answer the question as best you can. So what you learn is that you can get through anything. And it makes you tough, and it makes you strong, and it makes you disciplined, and it makes you have a philosophy of never, ever, ever, ever giving up.
Yeah, it definitely gives a sense of bravery because you have to overcome obstacles. And the more you get used to overcoming obstacles, the better you are dealing with obstacles.
This is exactly what I'm telling my stepson, 15-year-old stepson. He doesn't quite get it yet, but it's the road to character. And David Brooks wrote this wonderful book, and he profiles some people. And the major message is that people don't really remember the good times. They remember how hard the bad times were and the fact they got through it. It's very interesting.
So you then started 13D. When did you first start?
In 1983.
Why? Why did you start it? And what were you thinking? And where did you think it was going to go?
13D represents the SEC filing. If you buy 5% of a public company, you file a 13D. So I had been following 13D filings for a number of years, and I had a database on people that are now household names but weren't at that time. Warren Buffett, Carl Icahn, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a fabulous disclosure document because you have to say your average purchase price, your investment intentions, how much money you've invested, and your investment purpose. And if you want to take over the company and you say it's investment, it's not going to work. So I sent out a dummy issue to 200 of my friends saying, here's what I'm thinking of doing, and stocks are selling way below breakup value because inflation went up, asset values went up, and equity's cheap. And I got a 50% response. So all of a sudden, I was in business. This wasn't something I did for part-time investment. And then we got written up by Forbes, and so by November, I had 2,500 subscribers, and so it became a real occupation.
So now, cutting forward quite a few decades after that, we're now here in the Bahamas. You're kind of living in paradise, but yet you work incredibly hard, and you're a big accumulator of information. How do you do that? How do you get the balance in life that you need?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's extremely important. And the balance is many things. So a balance between work and fun, a balance between intensity and relaxation, a balance between thinking and meditating, a balance between male energy and female energy, a balance between spirituality and focusing on the world. So I'm extremely disciplined about time. And I'm sure that I could be criticized for being abrupt. But I'm on to my next thing. So it's a very short conversation, very short conversation. And the emails are extremely short. And that's the way it is. So I am phenomenally good at time management. And I have a regime. The only way you can get everything in is to have a structure.
But if you're too disciplined about time, because I've made similar choices to yourself. I lived on the Mediterranean coast in Spain. I now live in the Cayman Islands for much of a similar work-life balance. But I find if I'm too structured about time, I lose the beauty of time itself.
Well, that's absolutely right. Now, my answer to that is that I live twice. And it's a wonderful Japanese saying. You live twice. Once when you're born and once when you see death in the face. It's a James Bond film. It's an Ian Fleming book. So I thought about that and I said, I'd like to live twice every day. So what I do after I've done my meditation, I'll get into bed and I'll relive the day. Where did I have breakfast? What happened? Who did I see? What was the beautiful sunset that was so transformative? And what you'll find is there were things that you missed because you were rushing through the day that were incredibly significant. So I really live twice every single day.
So let's go into the big things now. The biggest thing everybody's obsessed with, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, blockchain. I'd love to pick your brains. What are your thoughts on this whole thing? I've got different views to most people, but how do you see this lineup?
Well, there's no question that the underlying technology, blockchain, is transformative. So I've been investing in blockchain for a long time. Bitcoin is something else. And one way of looking at Bitcoin is that it's decentralization. And it's taking away the power of money from central banks and governments, which is why I think there's this passion about it, and excitement, that people want to be free and liberalized and decentralized. Governments are terrified, of course. Governments will try to squash it and pop the bubble, which they've been doing in gold for a long time. They've been suppressing the price of gold. But one of the things that's most interesting is that they don't own Bitcoin, but they do own gold. And the Russians and the Chinese and other central banks keep buying physical gold. And there's an interest in many countries to get off of the dollar standard and maybe redo the financial system with the gold-backed currency. So how this all plays out, no one has the faintest idea. But I see it as a strike for monetary freedom. And I think all of us would like to get away from the power of central banks.
But is this, for me, it's a bit of a fantasy. Blockchain is a whole different thing. It's the future of the architecture of the financial system. I think that's clear. But I tend to spend a lot of time talking to people about Bitcoin, and there's a belief that this is the answer. But then it's almost impossible to be the answer. It's today alone, and overnight, it was up and down 20%. For a while, we priced Real Vision in Bitcoins. And at the time, it was 0.8 Bitcoins, which was about $400.
Right.
If I'd used the same 0.8 Bitcoins now, it would be $12,000. It's unusable in some of the formats that people want it to be usable in.
Right.
I think the idea is interesting, and clearly there's a desire to get away from central banks and have some decentralization. Right. But I don't think this is the answer.
It's all up for grabs. And there's a message that the markets are giving us on this. And how it plays out and which way it goes is to be determined. But something big is happening. And it's very possible that Bitcoin can be the beginning of the questioning of paper money. And that would be a very good thing, because central banks with quantitative easing and what they've been doing in manipulating markets so that no markets are really free. If we can get away from that, that's a very good thing. The transition from where we are now to there is tumultuous.
Something we were talking about earlier on this whole topic is the massive control that a few tech firms have over our lives and the kind of digital age in general. Where's your thinking with this?
Well, the first point is that the concentration of power will continue until it's met by an equal and opposite amount of power. And if you study history, you'll see this happens time and time again. So let's look at the Nazis. They had Britain on its knees. They had conquered Europe. They were in North Africa. They had invaded Russia. They were 30 miles from Moscow. And then it looked like it was over. They won. But they hadn't won. And the pushback began. Okay? So you see that. It's a law of physics. It's a law of the universe. This isn't something that algos can get around. It's a law of the universe. And the accumulation of too much power inevitably brings a backlash. So where it will happen is in 1996, Congress passed a law exempting the platforms from liability for what they put in the platform. Obviously, they're powerful and rich. They don't need that exemption anymore. So then there will be liable for things that they put on their platform that is ugly or damaging or wrong. And that means a big shift. So that's one thing. A second thing is that they are stymieing innovation. And they're doing this by acquiring other companies and by the sheer power and market strength that they have, that they can get into the new fields to a degree that no one else can. So if you look at the jobs in artificial intelligence that are offered in the United States, certainly 90% of them at least are being offered by the tech behemoths. So that means they're just getting more advanced and more advanced and more advanced. And then it'll be quantum computers and quantum communications, and then how you're going to catch up. The problem is that the US Congress is asleep at the wheel. They are technologically ignorant. So they don't understand what's going on. The EU gets it, and the right to be left behind. And you can't transfer data from Europeans back to the United States. So there already is movement there. And that's probably where it will begin, although 50 countries in one way or another are pushing back, and China already has pushed real back. So this is coming. It's just a question of when.
And what does it mean for those companies? What does it mean for Google? I mean, Google are essentially the internet as we know it, and Amazon is storage of the internet as we know it, and a number of other things. How does this play out? Where do you think the probabilities lie?
Well, I think that it's very hard to know how the regulators will go. But we're using in America antitrust theory that was from the late 19th century, early 20th century, which is monopoly power when it raises prices is bad, but monopoly power that is lowering prices and increasing efficiency is good. Well, that needs to be updated. You have to look at monopoly power however it's used. And it's the data that we all create through our transactions, through our texts, through our purchases, that is the most valuable commodity in the world. And whoever controls that data controls the power of the world. And they have it, and we're surrendering it to them for free. And that's in Estonia, that isn't the way it works. In Estonia, the people who generate it own it. And if you want to sell it, you can sell it. So that's another area that where we could see change. Regulation of the tech platforms like media companies. But then again, we now have quantum computing. Next year or in 2019, the Chinese will have a quantum computer that is 1 million times faster than all the computing power in the world today. And they have created a quantum communication system from Beijing to Shanghai that is unhackable, and it is a new form of the internet. And whoever owns quantum communications and computing will literally own the world.
And the Russians are working on this as well, aren't they?
The Russians are working on it as well. And the United States surely is, but not as concentrated as China is. So all I'm saying is that there can be technological obsolescence as well. Because if one of the big problems with the internet is that anything and everything can be and is hacked. There's absolutely no privacy. And data is available for anybody who wants it. We've been writing about this for 17 years, urging people to buy the internet security stocks. knowing full well that they admit they can't stop it. They can only mitigate it once it's happened. So the idea that you would create a new unhackable internet is also one possibility.
But quantum computing does another thing, which is almost destroy Bitcoin, because cryptography is almost worthless at that point.
That's right. That's right. And it would destroy the way many things are done. So it's the ultimate disruption.
Yeah, and let's go back to financial markets. If you apply quantum computing in financial markets, what chance do any of us have?
Well, that's exactly right. And I mean, if you go back 4 years ago, machines were already able to do every task better than humans. Already 3 or 4 years ago, the best computer programmers in the world are not as good as machines. And let's go to artificial intuition, which is fascinating. So we have this AlphaGo. So it was clear that Big Blue could beat the best chess master, because chess is a memory game. So you analyze millions of games, and that was easy. But the game Go, which is an Eastern game that has been in existence for 2,000 years, is intuition. And there is no programmable history. So when AlphaGo beat the best Go player, which is I think about a year ago, that was a huge revolution. Oh my God. And then AlphaGo Zero comes along. AlphaGo Zero, in 30 days, teaches itself with no help to beat AlphaGo 50 games to 0. So knowing that this is out there, and if you look at Moore's law, machine learning is increasing at a multiple, I can't even tell you how much faster, but it's just exponential.
So does this get us to the singularity that a lot of the West Coast is worrying about, where machines take over the world?
I don't know the answer. We think a lot about it. It's extremely important. Everywhere I go, people are concerned about it. Will I lose my job? Will I still have a job? And the answer is unknowable. I do think this is another reason why the whole tech tsunami has to slow down. It's too fast. People can't absorb it. It's overwhelming them. There's too much change. You just look around and you see breakdowns and opioid crisis and mass shootings. It's not directly related to that, but there is nothing to hold on to anymore. So I think that the answer is that we have to be human and emphasize human qualities, which is exactly what you and I are doing. We are talking on important topics. We're connecting. And all we're going to have left is connecting with each other. And that will be the way forward.
I mean, that's utopian. It's the thing many of us would dream of. But meanwhile, as you suggest, there's a holing out of society that's causing things like the opioid epidemic.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? How does society get to the utopian society and away from what the mess we seem to have left at the moment? And it's prevalent all around the world, or certainly in the Western world.
Well, we've been writing about artificial intelligence destroying potentially billions of jobs for 6 or 7 years. And people like Stephen Hawking are very against it. Everywhere I go, I ask this question. Everywhere I look, I ask our people. We have 65 people around the world. Study this, tell me, find some example of where technology is creating more jobs than it's destroying. And nobody can find anything. And the jobs that are being created in the United States are low-paying, temporary jobs. I don't know what the answer is. I fear for the future because these people vote. And what the tech cognoscenti doesn't understand is, with their idea of universal basic income as a solution, people have to have meaningful work to have a purpose in life. If you have no purpose in life, you can't just go out and play golf. When you're 75 or 80, sure, you can go out and play golf. But you have to have a job, a career, a profession that is meaningful to you. And if that's taken away from you, that's not nirvana. So I'm tremendously upset about it. And actually, America should just stop and say, we have to do something for these people. If we don't, there's going to be a social revolt because they vote. And they will vote against technology, and they will vote against free markets. And the millennials already, 90% of them, are socialists. So where do you see that trend going? You better start to do something about it.
And also, to exacerbate it, you have the baby boomers hurtling to retirement.
Exactly.
And they don't have enough money to retire.
Exactly.
There's a huge disgruntlement to come from these people.
Exactly. And can we trust that the pension payments and Social Security will be there and in real terms? No. The unfunded liabilities of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid is $100 trillion US. That's 5 times GDP. It's the same. It's the same in all the developed countries. And what we call the worker to retired, the dependency ratio is terribly distressing. Fewer young people supporting more older people. And society can't indefinitely absorb that as the baby boomers and others age. So that's why I studied Japan, which I call the laboratory. And that was the first country that had the baby bust, the first country that had a population peak, first country that had working age population peaked. And now they've got severe labor shortages, even though they're the most advanced country in robotics. Now, the Japanese companies are doing everything to retain and find people except give wage increases, because it's ingrained in their mindset for 20 years, no wage increases. Abe gave them a huge depreciation in the currency, and he asked them, please give wage increases. Now he's asked them again, you must give wage increases. So we'll see, it's a laboratory. And if the tax cut in America goes through, will American corporations with that large S, will they give wage increases, or will they use it to buy back stocks?
What do you think?
Well, I think we all know the answer, right?
So how does Europe work in all of this? We haven't talked about Europe at all.
Yeah.
How does Europe play out? I mean, it's got a whole load of structural issues. There are some changes going on with Britain is one thing, and potentially in France and Germany as well. There's other things going on. How do you see Europe playing out right now?
Well, let me go back a couple of years when I was making the case that people were too bearish on China, too bearish on Europe, and too bullish on the United States. And I was saying it's going to be a re-rating, just a re-rating. And the arguments against the euro surviving are extremely good. I mean, brilliant. I can't disagree with it. But there are 2 factors that are more important. And the first one is 500 years of wars in Europe. And most importantly, the 2 world wars that devastated Europe. In 1914, Europe controlled 87% of the landmass of the world. And it basically entered on suicide. In the First World War, 500,000 French soldiers were blown up so that their bodies could not be recovered, which meant that the widows could not get a pension. You think that in 100 years that scar has gone away? I don't think so. So my view has been that Europe's desire to hold together is much stronger than people think. And Brexit confirmed that, because the day after Brexit, European equities started to improve relative strength-wise against the S&P. People saw Brexit as the last, not the beginning. And you look at the agonies that May is going through. Who knows what's going to happen there? I mean, she could be fired. It's so complex, no one can even begin to understand it. And the EU's, what incentive did they have to do a deal? None.
No.
The longer you elapse, the more people leave the UK to go to Frankfurt and Paris. So here I am watching Le Pen, Macron, first debate. This is before the second runoff. And I knew he had it then. He said to her, I know your kind of nationalism. I live in a province that's full of graves from your nationalism. I knew he had it then. And it's amazing that Europe can hold together with 27 countries with different, it's extraordinary. But this huge legacy of wars and occupation and destruction and bombing and killing and dying. 100 million people died in the Second World War. Is a legacy that cannot be forgotten. The second point, which is probably more easy to understand. Now, the United States is now deciding to do bilateral trade agreements, not multilateral, and renegotiating all of the agreements. Mexico, Canada, you know it's coming with Canada, you know it's coming with Japan, you know it's coming with Germany. So if you are lonely UK and the United States wants to beat you up, which they did on the Northern Ireland Bombardier plant, and it went from being a sweet relationship between the UK and the US with a special trade deal to a trade war overnight. And the Prime Minister of Ireland said, Prime Minister May, you should maybe think that you're better off being part of Europe. And I think the same thing applies in Southeast Asia. So the Prime Minister of Thailand, around about the same time, was with Trump in the White House. And I read the press conference very carefully. It wasn't much said. But Trump said, we want to sell more to you. There's a trade deficit of 10 billion. Now, I'm the Prime Minister of Thailand. I'm thinking, he's beating up Mexico and Canada. I'm a small country. I have no power. He can do exactly what he wants with me. Maybe I better move closer to China. So what you can infer from that is that being part of a powerful trade bloc is much better than being an independent country. So even in Poland and Hungary and places where they're upset with the EU, there's no talk about leaving the common market, the common currency.
But you do notice there's another shift going on that you alluded to, which is a gravitational pull between Russia, China, potentially Iran, Turkey. There's a whole bunch of other people forming together some sort of trade alliance. How do you think that all plays out? I know you're very bullish on China. Do you think that the gravitational force of China is going to build that whole region?
I do. Remember at Davos, she said, I believe in free trade. We want to buy from you. And we believe in the environment. We're going to clean up China. Trump, on the other hand, said, we're out of TPP. We're going to renegotiate NAFTA, and we're going to withdraw from the Paris Accord. So it's very stark, that contrast. And China has the One Belt road, which many people in the West are cynical about. I'm not at all cynical about it. I think it's real. And I think it's one of the great geopolitical visions ever. So the entire trade belt, all the way across Central Asia, into Eastern Europe and down into Africa, that's all going to become significant trading partners of China. And she said that his view of the way globalization should work is that it's not one country dictating to another country how to run itself internally. You do trade, and each country has its own sovereignty. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that the China model, which is we'll give you money, we'll invest in you, we'll build power plants, we'll build roads, we'll build high-speed rail, we'll buy from you, and we're not going to tell you how to run your country. Has to be very appealing.
But do you not think there is an opportunity for the Chinese to exert control because they have such economic power, or do you think it's more benign power?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't think power is ever benign. And we saw what happened in Korea when the Koreans allowed the THAAD missile system to be put in, which ostensibly was put in to protect Korea from North Korea. But you could argue the THAAD missile defense system also allows surveillance of large parts of China, which the Chinese obviously were extremely upset with. So the Chinese stopped all tourist visits to Korea for a year. And it was quite stark. And they've done the same thing with Japan at various times. So there's no question they can use that lever to affect change.
So that leads us on to China itself. I know you're very bullish on the Chinese economy overall,
Right.
but as investors, it's not so easy to invest in. How do you see the investment opportunities in China, and how do you also see the economic opportunities within China, which seem more obvious, but the investment opportunities, most people in the West are struggling.
I believe in China. I've seen them do unbelievable things. And there is a dynamism in countries. And there's this great memoir by Robert Kwok, K-U-O-K, who's the Malaysian sugar king. He owns the Shangri-La hotels, various other businesses across Asia. He's now 94. And it's a fascinating book. It sold out in 2 days, first printing. And he's saying that the greatest entrepreneurs in the world come from South China. And all the ones who've made the most money in Hong Kong all come from there. None of them went to college. None of them went to school. And they just have this phenomenal talent for entrepreneurial. And they work hard. And they're smart. And so I can't say that about the entire Chinese people, but there is a phenomenal energy there. And when you unleash 1.3 billion people who've been suppressed economically for 1,000 years, whatever it is, it's just, and you have this incredible tsunami of excitement and energy. And you go to Shanghai, there are 145,000 companies that are registered to do business. Some of the biggest companies in the world. Why? Why? Because they see the potential, they see the energy. And what you have in what's called the Big Bay, which used to be the Pearl River Delta, which comprises Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Shun, Shanghai, is you have the logistical manufacturing capital of the world. And nobody can equal it. Silicon Valley has innovation, but it doesn't have logistics or manufacturing. So you take that, if you have innovation, and you add to it logistics and shipping, you have a huge advantage. So also in Shanghai, the Chinese government is building thousands and thousands of subsidized apartments. And they're telling entrepreneurs from all over China, come and innovate, start a business, not come and get a job, come and create.
I get that, and I find it very encouraging. But we've seen the endless empty cities and the misallocation of capital, both at the government level and the private level. I mean, that's a real issue in China. Sure, the next 20, 30 years, the Chinese story is pretty clear. But how'd you get through the next 5?
Well, I remember being in in Chengdu after the emerging Asian crisis. And a third of the buildings were unoccupied, half finished. I remember in 1997, 25% of the world's cranes were in Shanghai. I remember being on the top of the Shanghai Stock Exchange. They took a picture of me facing Pudong. Wasn't a single building. Now they have 4,000 buildings, all filled. And what we have is the greatest explosion in wealth creation and taking people out of poverty. And there's still another 400 million to do it. So every time we see one of these cities, sooner or later, somehow, these buildings get completed and they get filled up. And I've seen it happen all these years, so I just can't bet against it.
But what about the debt?
Well, the debt, remember, is global. So we've got 221 trillion global debt at the end of last year. Obviously, it's up since then. That's 3 times global GDP. And how much of that debt added since 2007 was unproductive debt? A lot of it. In China, at least, it went into high-speed rail. It went into airports at cities. It went into opening up China, like America did under Dwight Eisenhower with the interstate highway system. It went into infrastructure. 11 trillion China spent in the last 10 years, while America wants to spend 1 trillion over the next 10, if Trump can get the money. So if a country is investing in the future, in the latest technologies, and is investing to drag people out of poverty so they can become contributors to the economy and earn a living and then spend and grow, that's a very healthy thing. And of course, it's expensive. It requires the use of debt. The US in the 19th century did the same thing. US borrowed massively from the UK to build its rail systems and its infrastructure. And it turned out fine. So as long as you're growing at 5 or 6%, as I believe China will, because the consumer economy and the services economy is representing 70 or 80% of China's economic growth. So it's moving away from investments, moving away from exports into domestic consumption. And that's a wonderful thing because that's just beginning.
And how do you see India playing out? Because India looks like it's finally doing some good things. What's your view on India right now?
What Modi is doing is extraordinary. And my feeling was that what is holding India back is caste system, regulations. It's not one country, but it's 40 countries, right? How are you going to make that work? It's never been governable or manageable. But this is where the internet comes in. And I always felt that Modi could come in and, like Alexander at the Gordian knot, which he couldn't untie, that nobody could untie, he took a sword and went, phew. And that's what I see Modi doing with all of these restrictions, all of the taboos that were not possible to break. And with the internet, it's all possible. And he created this national identity card that nobody thought was possible. And he has an 88% approval rating. And so it's starting to happen. We think it's very possible that India could be the best performing investment arena over the next 10 years. It's very exciting. We have a big office in Delhi.
So where else do you see great opportunities in the world? And where do you see great risk in the world?
Well, I think opportunities, I'll come back to Europe. So Europe was selling at a huge discount, rightfully so, because it was very widely perceived that the euro was going to break up. And if I'm right, that's not going to happen. It's going to get stronger. And now we have Macron, who is young. He's techno-savvy. He's creative. He's inclusive. He negotiates with the 2 largest unions and gets a deal done. And France can come alive. And When I said this after Reagan was elected, and I coined the expression, the reverse of Gresham's law. So Gresham's law is that bad currency drives out good. So if you have a gold coin and you clip it, obviously the good gold coins are going to go out of circulation. So that's what Gresham's law is. So I said it'll be the reverse of Gresham's law, that good management and good economic policies will drive out bad. And that's exactly what happened over the world. And that's what I think can happen here. What works in France can also happen in Italy. It can also happen elsewhere. So I think Europe is a great place to invest. And I also think that, coming back to what I was saying before, in 1914, Europe was at the peak of its contribution to the world of its civilization. And it was the center of art, center of music, center of writing and literature and creation of beauty. And there's not much of that in the world. And it's my dream that European civilization will have a resurgence here. And all the things that we love about the old European civilization could come back for a while. So Europe is certainly there. Japan, I've been very lucky. I haven't lost money in Japan because I never wanted to be there. So it's not because I was smart, it's just because it's manipulated. I'm just not going to do it. So I shorted the yen in 1995 and had its blow off, and I shorted the yen after Abe said he was going to run and want to take over the Bank of Japan. It was October of 2012, and then I bought the Japanese stock market. But I believe that a secular bull market began in Japan at that time. And, you know, that was 1989, 2012. That's a long time, right? And they are some of the best companies, and they are sitting on piles of cash, and they do have phenomenal R&D, and they are global. And so I think Japan is going to keep on doing well. So I think those are interesting. I think the opportunities are outside the United States over the next 10 years.
Yeah, so how do you see the US playing out? Does it kind of play the catch-up to Europe's growth, i.e. the lower growth from an aging population that's indebted? How do you see the US play out? And also the difficulty of investing there with highly manipulated markets and et cetera?
Well, you know, we have a lot of capital that's concentrated in the US. And capital concentration inevitably leads to capital dispersion. The challenge is to find how much is too much and when is a crowded trade a really crowded trade, right? And that's beyond this conversation because no one really knows. Or I'm sure somebody does know, but I don't know them. And so I think that too much capital concentrated in the US from 2007 to the end of 2015. And it did so because of the deflation and because the US was considered a safer place and Europe was tightening its banking system and they were a large source of capital for emerging markets. But the growth is in Asia and the population is in Asia. So that's logically where you would invest. But we also have all these geopolitical shifts going on that I described earlier to a certain extent. Now you have Egypt, which is allowing Russian military bases. You have Abe, who's going to Beijing. You have huge geopolitical shifts. And whether it was going to happen anyway or whether it's happening because of Trump, I think it would have happened anyway. He's just accelerated with his America First policies. So countries are looking around for new alliances. And before, it was America was the one you wanted to have the alliance with. America was the country you wanted to trade with. And now it's a different world. So that also means the capital will shift as well.
So therefore, isn't Russia one of the most underpriced markets in the world?
Very much so, which brings me to oil. So, meaning no disrespect to my good friend Andy Hall, when he closed his fund, and he was considered god of the oil trading world, and he had been bullish, and then he finally gave up. And he said in his resignation letter, in his letter to his clients, this may be the bottom. Well, it looks like it was. It's funny how these things work out. So if oil goes up, then the Russian stock market will go up. And then this brings me to MBS and Saudi Arabia. So I've used the world's tallest building indicator. It's never not worked. I'm sure there's a first time. And it called the top in 73. It called the top in 28, 29. It called the top in 1907. And the Saudis will complete the world's highest building in 2018. Now we have this young prince, 32 years old, and his father, the king, instead of going the traditional way of the heirs being horizontal like this, just has gone right down like this and severed everything that had been done for 50 years. That you have to have an institutional structure for the transfer of power. Otherwise, you can get into very deep trouble. So here we have hauled many of the elite in Saudi Arabia into the Ritz-Carlton to negotiate. The word is that some are being tortured. I don't have any knowledge one way or the other, and they're going to be surrendering all this money. Now, how has he spent money? Well, when he went to Moscow, I read that he had 1,000 staff people that went. He gave a party and spent $100 million, bought an impulse yacht a couple of years ago for $400 million. And who do you think just bought the new Da Vinci painting for $450 million? But the timing of it was very bad. You can't do that when you're extorting money from people who are known in the Western world as being the good investors and are the front of Saudi Arabia. So I think that's a very shaky foundation. And there's no geopolitical risk at all in the price of oil. And then you add to that, you have huge underinvestment in oil the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. And you add to that the fact that finally shale oil is getting some capital discipline and money just won't be thrown at these people. So you put that all together and you get a higher price of oil. I don't have to have something going wrong with Saudi Arabia for oil to go up.
Do you not feel that we didn't get the bust that we typically get in the commodity cycle? We almost had a bust a couple of years ago, but it wasn't quite big enough to write off some of the excesses and just rebalance properly before we start again, which is how it usually plays out.
Well, commodities have never gone down more than 3 years in a row in succession in 500 years of history, which they did. Then they went down a 4th year. So it's like 5,000-year lows in interest rates. The summer of 2015, I got my buy signal on commodities. The buy signal is not precise on timing, but it was that the big commodity producers, the iron ore and the metals and mining, were giving away properties that they paid $10 billion for. That's always a sign. We saw that in New York City real estate in 1977, when the U.S. Trust gave away a triplex apartment for $1 because the maintenance at $3,000 was too high. So it comes back to global growth. It comes back to China is shuttering capacity. And where you've seen the sharpest rises in industrial commodities have been areas where they've cut capacity. There's still a lot of capacity that has to be cut. I mentioned shale. There were a lot of the problem in the oil because capital was just flowing in without any restriction or restraint. And they weren't making any money. They lost money, but the capital kept flowing in. So I think it's a good case. Commodities will go up.
So you don't see a risk of any global slowdown in your framework, because this is already the second longest business cycle in US history, and for other countries extremely long, Australia ludicrously long.
Yeah.
Do you not see a risk of a slowdown coming at some point within this? Because as you and I know, there's a secular cycle and there's the business cycle, and the business cycle can get in the way of the secular cycle for a short period of time. The long-term cycle usually emerges, but do you not see any risk of the business cycle?
So starting in early 2016, it was clear to us from market action that the deflation trends, which have been very significant and very severe, were beginning to reverse. And when you see something starting off with it's one market, it's a second, then it's a third, then it's a fourth, and the broader the number of markets that confirm the trend, the more confident you are that it's real. I've seen this many, many times. So right now, we have long dormant markets breaking out. We have a whole raft of indicators on reflation. We have countries that are moving away from austerity, which the United States to a certain extent, certainly Europe. Other countries understand you've got to get on the fiscal side. You've got to get economic growth, because otherwise you'll be thrown out of power. Then there's this huge potential for CapEx spending. Corporations are just like investors. They're act in herds. So after the financial crisis, everybody was squeeze. And I squeeze you, squeeze all the way. And will that change? I don't know. That's why I'm watching Japan very carefully as a laboratory. Sharing in the profits with the people and the laborer, which of course is going to help the country. But more importantly, there is an arms race in technology going on that if other countries don't do quantum communications or artificial intelligence or whatever it may be, high-tech manufacturing, you'll be left behind. And I think there's going to be a wake-up call. Oh boy, we better invest. We better catch up, because we're really falling behind.
Is that difficult because the countries that are leading the way are centralized investors? It's coming from government. The countries that are falling behind are decentralized investors. The private sector is too busy buying their own shares to make themselves rich and investing in their future. Is that a structural problem?
For sure. It is a structural problem. And it may not happen. But I think if you study quantum communications and computers, you can see the potential that the existing structure can just be overwhelmed by it. So I can't predict how America will react. You would think that there would be more spending. And there's certainly a need for spending. Infrastructure has been neglected. We kept track for a while. There's hundreds of trillions of dollars that can be spent globally. Clean water, smart grid, it's endless, the amount that needs to be spent and can be spent. But you just have to mobilize capital and to focus on spending it. In investing, you have to have an imagination, because you always imagine what could happen, what can't happen. And we're starting to see some signs in our interpretation of the market that this might be starting to happen.
There's another area that you focus on that I'm really interested in as well, that people are not so focused on, which is longevity of life and a number of, what's going on with health in general,
right,
and the opportunities that arise from that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I will go anywhere and do anything literally. And if it works, I will do it. And I'll keep doing it. And then if it works, I'll tell my friends and tell my clients. And they value that information more probably than anything else I have to say, because I find some really interesting things. For example, I have these energy glasses. They're made in Germany by an entrepreneur. And you put them on like this, and you're looking into a light. It's a white light in the morning when you wake up, and it's a red light at night. So what the white light does is it stimulates your brain, your focus, and your memory. And since I've been doing it, my memory has improved tremendously. I'm just telling you my experience, not for everybody. And then at night, you take it, and it stimulates the pineal gland, which is right here. And when stimulated, creates natural melatonin, and melatonin helps you sleep. And I'm just out. And sleep is precious. Another very important aspect of health and longevity is your nervous system. And it's not something that Western medicine focuses on. So you have the sympathetic, which is the fight-flight mode. And you have the parasympathetic, which is the rest, heal, or restore. And the Russians invented a test in the 60s called the heart rate variability test. And the reason was they wanted to test their athletes to see how quickly they could go from the fight-flight, meaning a race, to a recover, so their muscles would be restored for the next race. And it's very rarely given in the US, although it's catching on here a little bit. But it's a way to measure your ability to go from fight-flight into parasympathetic. And ideally, you want to have a balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we had a conference in August at my home in Sun Valley, and the keynote was Dr. Sapolsky, who's an expert on stress. And he started off by saying, everybody in this room will die from a stress-related disease. And of course, people in money management are stressed out, to put it mildly. And that's a whole key part of this, is to know how to get rid of stress and how to get into the sympathetic mode.
Is that not similar to meditation?
Meditation, you could go to a mountain in Tibet with a lama and achieve this level of lack of stress. It would take you about 5 or 10 years.
You've got young kids. They're looking into the future, you look into the future. What advice do you give them in how to navigate the world ahead?
We agonize over this question and have from the very beginning. And I have friends who will say, well, I'm going to go visit colleges, and going to Brown and Harvard, whatever. And I'll say, yeah, but what are you educating your children for? And then they'll come back and say, well, if it doesn't work at Harvard, they can go next. No, I'm sorry. What are you educating them for? What world are you educating them for? And even very sophisticated people who are aware of all these trends aren't asking that question. I'm just amazed. Because the world that we were educated for doesn't exist. And the world when these girls are ready for whatever it is, college, if in fact we even want to send them to college, if in fact we even want to send them to school, we should maybe homeschool them, who knows? The world is changing. We don't know what machines will be able to do. We don't know what will be the tools you need to get through life. So we come back to all you can do is to teach them communication skills, teach them emotional intelligence, teach them respect and values, self-discipline, resilience.
For me, in a world of robots and artificial intelligence, it seems that there's a huge premium to be paid for creativity.
Right, absolutely.
But I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, you're absolutely right. And my wife wrote this article about this book that says that very thing, and that creativity tends to be severely damaged in schools. And I read her article and I said, we're pulling Natasha out of school. We've experimented with homeschooling before. Now we're going to do it. Because the damage that the peers do and the damage that the school, which is focusing on, you got to learn this, you got to all here. And she's immensely creative. She's unbelievably creative, but it's not being developed.
I mean, look, the simple case is most rock stars end up leaving the school system.
Right.
People who end up being rock stars.
That's
because
right.
creativity is too restricted within that kind of societal education.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And so you start off with homeschooling and then curiosity. So if you read the Da Vinci book by Walter Isaacson, it's an absolutely magnificent book. It's so hopeful because here you had the man who created the two greatest paintings ever, The Last Supper and Mona Lisa, who also was the greatest scientist, probably until Einstein. And he saw himself as being a scientist and an artist. So today, we think that science is not part of beauty, is not part of art. And it was so refreshing to see this. So it's also exposing the child to beauty and to the wondrous parts of the world where there are treasures that have lasted for thousands of years because they touched that chord. And there is an eternal chord, and that's what Da Vinci felt. And he was trying to understand the world, because if he understood the world, then he would understand science, but also he could paint a picture that would describe the world. So that's part of it. Another part is my dream always was to instill in the girls a love of learning and curiosity. And that's what Da Vinci was. He's probably the most curious man in history. And Einstein is maybe the second most curious. So it's intellectual curiosity, and you're not going to have that in a school. And so my dream has been, and if I'm lucky enough, I'll pull it off. You take all the spheres of human knowledge. Let's say you start off with geography, history, physics, math, you name it. You could slice it any way you want. And you have somebody come and lecture to them for a week. It's not a famous Don, but it's somebody who can inflame the passion to learn in the subject. So in my own case, I come from a long line of doctors, and I needed massive tutoring in high school to get through a course called physical chemistry. My father had a PhD in chemistry, so that's what I would love to do for these girls. And once you get them passionately curious and you open their mind to how these subjects are infinitely interesting, then you just turn them loose on the world.
Well, Kiril, thank you for opening your mind for us and all the people at Real Vision as well. I think people thoroughly enjoyed the wide-ranging topics and the number of things that you know so much about, and sharing with us was amazing. So
Thank you
really
very much.
appreciate
I
it.
really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, that really didn't disappoint. We covered an enormous array of topics, and that's one of Kiril's key skill sets, is his massive breadth of knowledge about so many things. And I think it was really interesting to see his views on China, where he seems completely unconcerned by some of the more, let's say, cyclical issues that may be facing China, because his view is firmly on the horizon and where it's going. It's also interesting to see his views on America and how it's falling behind in many of these things. I think the discussion about technology and the future of tech firms was something also interesting. And I like the wholeness of how Kiril approaches things, whether it's his lifestyle and how he thinks of time allocation, or how he thinks of health and longevity of living. I think all of these things are important. It's not only just about the actionable idea for today, where can I make money, but how that all fits in with how we exist within the world. And for that, Kiril is the master. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.